get started here, we're going to talk today about blood vessels. We've had a pretty good discussion the past week on the parts of the heart. So now we're going to go with blood vessels, and there should be, I hope there's no issues on this because I took this right from eLearn, these slides. So I hope there's no issue.
There was only a few.
Yeah, and you know, because I can't resist the urge to change. You know,
Yeah.
I try not to. But,
So that's why we're missing certain slides in lecture.
Okay.
right. I try to, if I think it's sort of a useless slide, it's gone.
Yeah.
So
And then you forget to
then I forget to change
it out.
I
I
forget. So.
understand.
Okay, so we're going to look at blood vessels today, and then next week, well, not next week, but next week's spring break. The week after that, we'll come back and wrap up on assessments, and then we only have the urinary respiration and digestion to get done.
Is that one?
That's the last unit is urinary
So
respiration.
after this, we'll have one more.
After this, you have one. After this exam, you have one more, and you're done.
Oh, yeah.
So, okay, so with no further ado, I'm going to, unless anybody has a question, I'm going to go ahead and open up this section on blood vessels. Okay, so what you're seeing here is a slide of a cross section of an artery and a vein. And the artery is the one on the right-hand side. The artery is the one that has the thicker wall. Every artery and a vein has the same type of structure. They all have a, there's the artery, there's the vein. The lumen is the middle part where the open part of any vessel where something goes through it. And they're all going to have the same layer. They're going to have a layer, an internal layer that's smooth and non-stick. That's this layer right along in here, adjacent to the lumen, whether it's an artery or a vein. We don't want to have anything sticking on the walls. So we have this non-stick surface. We call it the tunica intima. Tunica intima is coat. So we have a tunica intima, or the innermost layer, you know, or the internal layer, or whatever you want to call it. Then you have a tunica media, which is the muscle layer. And all of our arteries and veins have large layers of muscles around there because the ability to transfer blood to different parts of the body depends on the ability to squeeze or relax our vessels. We have two terms, vasoconstriction and vasodilation. Vasodilation means the vessel expands, and vasoconstriction means it shrinks. And we're always moving blood around our bodies where it's needed because we don't have enough blood to fill up every vein and every artery at the same time. On a hot day, we will send lots of blood to our skin to get rid of heat. On a cold day, we will restrict the flow to our skin so we don't lose a lot of heat, but we never have enough blood to fill up every vessel. And so that's what the smooth muscle layers do, the tunica media. And then the outermost layer, which is, there we go, the outermost layer is called the tunica adventitia, which is connective tissue, which is what holds it in place. And we find both arteries and veins have these same structures. Now you'll notice that while the vein over there has the same structures, it is much smaller. The lumen is much smaller. The amount of muscle around there is much smaller. But they do have the similar structures, which is one of the reasons why we can use veins in place of arteries, like if we're doing a graft or a bypass procedure. So, okay, now, cardiovascular system, our blood vessels have three types. We have arteries and arterioles. Arterioles are little tiny arteries, same properties. Arteries always carry blood away from the heart. Pulmonary arteries, pulmonary trunk, remember we looked at that in the heart last week. Pulmonary trunk goes into the pulmonary arteries and blood goes away from the heart, even if it's low in oxygen. Veins always bring blood back to the heart. So veins, the oxygen level in venous blood is always going to be reduced, except in the pulmonary veins. bringing that bright red blood back to the left atria. So arteries always bring blood away from the heart. Veins always bring blood to the heart. Capillaries are where the action is. There are millions and millions, probably billions of capillaries. The capillaries are in contact with every cell in our body. Every cell is in touch with at least one capillary, because this is where nutrient exchange and gas exchange takes place and waste exchange takes place. Some cells, like in the lungs, the alveoli cells can have up to 100 capillaries in touch with them. So we go arteries down to arterioles, down to capillaries, back to venules, little tiny veins, and into bigger veins, back to the heart. So it's a continuous cycle or circuit, if you will. So it's a closed system. Everything starts and ends at the heart. The right side of the heart pumps to the lungs. The blood from the lungs comes back to the left side of the heart. The left side of the heart pumps to the body, goes out through the body and comes back to the right side again. Two separate circuits. Arteries and arterioles always carry blood away from the heart. The exception, of course, is going to be in the circulation in the fetus. We'll talk about that in lecture after break. Veins and venules always carry blood towards the heart. Capillaries are in contact with every cell. I know it said the same thing I already said, but it's a good picture here. So now, artery and vein, but here we have the capillary. The capillary doesn't have smooth muscle. The capillary doesn't have a layer of connective tissue. The capillary is just a lining, it's just made up of epithelial cells with a smooth surface. That's all they have. So they're only one cell layer thick, which is great because we want to have movement of gases and nutrients and waste products across the membrane of the cell into the capillary, and from the capillary back into the cell. We want to send good stuff out and bad stuff to come in. So the capillaries are very tiny, one cell layer thick. They're sort of elastic, but they're usually smaller than a red blood cell. Red blood cells have to be squeezed to go into the capillaries, and then they'll pop out the other side. But they're like a big water balloon, big squishy water balloon. So, yeah. And the arteries and the arterial network meet the veins in the capillary beds. Capillary beds is this huge network of these tiny vessels that connect to every cell. And there are, maybe millions, billions of them. And you can see in the illustration here that the arteries go from the large arteries to the smaller arteries, the arterioles, and then the arterioles fan out to supply the capillaries. And then they're in contact with every cell, and then gradually they coalesce, come together to give you the larger and larger veins. And we return. The capillaries are very porous. They've got lots of holes in there. Blood vessels are not a sealed tube. Blood vessels are leaky structures. Lots of openings in here. And so that's where we can have all the movement of fluid, of water and salts and nutrients and gases going into the cells. You can see just what a capillary looks like compared to the pretty complex structure here, the artery and the vein, but the capillary is pretty simple. So I mentioned this already. The tunica intima is the lining of a vessel. Tunica media is the smooth muscle in here. The smooth muscle and the elastic fibers are controlled by the sympathetic nervous system. Sympathetic nervous system controls vasoconstriction and vasodilation using epinephrine and norepinephrine. We control vasodilation not by releasing any type of, remember that norepinephrine and epinephrine are the neurotransmitters of the sympathetic side of the nervous system. I'm sure you were just like talking about that the other day, But these neurotransmitters epinephrine is used to stimulate the heart. Norepinephrine controls the diameter of our blood vessels. Now, do we release it to open it or do we release it to close it? Well, what happens is we release norepinephrine to get constriction. We stop releasing it to get it to relax. So if we're pushing down on the pedal and we're releasing lots of norepinephrine, the vessels are going to constrict. Not every vessel. It's only going to be a localized event. We're going to constrict. If we stop stimulating the release of norepinephrine, the vessel relaxes. So that's how we get vasoconstriction. Norepinephrine gives us vasoconstriction. If we stop releasing it, then we get vasodilation. And that's how we can alter where the blood's going to go. You go into a fight or flight response and you need blood for your brain and your heart and your lungs and your muscles and nowhere else. All the other systems can just wait for a while. You're shutting down the flow. You're vasoconstricting the vessels where we don't need a lot of blood to go, and you're letting the other ones dilate so we get lots of blood going to the brain, the heart, lungs, and muscles. We don't care about our stomach. We don't care about our skin or our reproductive structures or anything else. We just let it wait. And then, of course, everything's held in place now. 3 types of arteries. The conducting arteries, like the big ones, the aorta, for example, the carotid artery, the aorta, the pulmonary trunk. These are the largest with lots of elastic tissue. The distributing arteries go to the various organs, like the renal artery goes to the kidneys, hepatic artery to the liver, and so on. And they're a little bit smaller. They branch out more. And then the arterioles, this is where we do our vasoconstriction and vasodilation, is at the level of the artery. Most of that's done at the arterioles. Highly innervated from the sympathetic nervous system. Lots and lots of arterioles. We can fine tune where the blood's going to go by squeezing or relaxing these arterioles. So now the elastic arteries, these conducting arteries, these big ones, they have thick walls, big lumens. They're covered with elastic fibers throughout. They can stand all sorts of changes in our blood pressure. Remember when we looked at the heart last week, we were able to see just how thick the aortic wall was. The aorta was at least maybe 1/4 of an inch to 1/2 an inch thick compared to the pulmonary trunk, which was thick, but not nearly as thick as that. The aorta can deal with a pressure change going from 80 millimeters of mercury up to 180. Because every time our heart contracts, we have this surge of blood that comes out into the aorta. High pressure surge, and that surge travels down the aorta, and the elastic walls of the aorta open up and then come back. And they open up and come back every 0.7 of a second. So they can deal with it because it's the biggest, most powerful blood vessel in our bodies. We get closer to the organs. We have a thicker wall, more smooth muscle, they're less elastic. We get some vasoconstriction here with the muscular arteries, like arteries going to like the brachial artery here in our arm, or the axillary artery, or the renal artery, or something like that. They don't need to be very elastic. And then the arterioles are going to control, the arteriole's primary responsibility is to control the flow into the capillary beds. And also that's where the vasoconstriction takes place too. Here we see the arterioles. Now this is supposed to represent, these little lines are supposed to represent sympathetic nervous system stimulating that vessel. Lots and lots and lots of stimulus. So it means we have lots of neurotransmitter being released, lots of norepinephrine. And so the vessel on the top is constricted because there's lots of norepinephrine present. The vessel on the bottom is the same vessel, but it's dilated because we've cut back on the amount of norepinephrine. Yeah, we simply reduce the stimulus, and the smooth muscle relaxes. And this is where this most of this is taking place in the arterioles, vasoconstriction, vasodilation. We get a little bit in the muscular arteries, but most of it in the arterioles. And it's all based on the presence of norepinephrine or the absence of it. So, and again, here's same artery or same arteriole here, vasoconstriction and vasodilation. This one, the one on the left constricts, reducing the flow. It also raises the pressure too, it reduces the flow. The one on the right increases the flow because it has relaxed, so all caused by the presence or absence of norepinephrine. So, I really can't, and this third slide on it, I can't emphasize this enough. I wanted to make sure that I don't mind showing it 3 different ways, but look at the bottom, same arteriole at the bottom. Left one is constricted, the one on the right is dilated. The photograph there of the vessels, same vessel, constricted or relaxed. Again, it has to do with where we're moving the blood around. Sometimes we have to move blood around in lots of places, and sometimes we don't. We want to shut down flow when we have to. Sometimes we want to increase the flow when we have to.
Which one did you say was like on there was constricted and dilated, or they both?
This little one is constricted.
That one's constricted.
Yes. This is constricted, that's relaxed. Same vessel, but that's when it's relaxed. Less norepinephrine. So it's essentially what's happening here. All you're doing is sending the signal to release the neurotransmitter at a faster or a slower rate. That's all we're doing. So, okay. Now these are the capillaries. And we find the capillaries in between the arteries and the veins. They are the smallest vessel. They're only 1 cell layer thick. They generally allow one red cell at a time to go through here. This is where being the beauty of being 1 cell layer thick, they're butted up against another cell so that oxygen can diffuse out of the red cell and into from the red cell into the blood, across the membrane, into the membrane of the target cell. Oxygen can't diffuse very far. It's really limited on the distance it can go. Going from 1 cell membrane to another one is just fine. You get if you got bigger than that, deeper than that, it'd be hard to do, So the advantage, for us, the circulatory system works great because every cell is in contact with a capillary. We don't have to diffuse very far. We start getting thicker and thicker layers, we get into some real issues here. In pneumonia, what happens in pneumonia is that mucus accumulates inside the lungs, on the inside of the alveoli. It thickens the wall of the alveoli, and it makes it harder for oxygen to diffuse across the cells. And so your patient is suffocating. Your patient's suffocating because they can't get enough oxygen, to get across from the alveoli into their blood, because the alveoli has become thicker thanks to all this mucus accumulating in there. So we don't like to have real thick layers. So 1 cell, 1 capillary, ideal. Okay. Capillaries come in 3 types. They can be continuous, they can be fenestrated, they can be sinusoidal. A continuous capillary is the most common type. We have these everywhere. They got gaps, they have openings in there that allow interstitial fluid to leak out, but they're all over our bodies, and that's a good thing. They are held together with tight junctions, but they do have gaps. The only place we don't have continuous capillaries is in the brain. Now, the second type of capillaries are the fenestrated capillaries. We use those for filtration. They line the inside of our small intestine. They are underneath the simple columnar cells that line the small intestine, because they absorb the nutrients that the small intestine picks up. We also have them in our kidneys where we filter out our plasma. It goes right through these fenestrations here. We'll talk a lot about that in a couple of weeks. And then the sinusoidal capillaries have great big openings, large openings in them. Big gaps, lots of blood vessels and blood and molecules can come across here. The liver has lots of these sinusoidal capillaries because they have to filter a lot of stuff and detoxify a lot of stuff. Our spleen has lots of these large capillaries because they're sucking up old red cells and tearing them apart. That's what they do. And so we want to make sure we get rid of those red cells. So, and I said that already, and I said that already, and I said that already. So, okay. The capillary beds, you can have, you have one arteriole can lead to 100 capillaries. And the capillaries also have sphincters right here. A sphincter is a ring of muscle that will shut down fluid or motion through there. We have sphincters at our urethras and on our anus. We have sphincters that control the movement of any fluid, like from the bladder to through the prostate. These sphincters are just rings of muscle, and we can actually control movement through the capillary beds by shutting down flow, by squeezing these sphincters, so that we end up reducing the flow through the whole bed to just one area. We can, it causes a bypass. It looks something, when the sphincters are shut, we get this. Now, it's not going to be shut long enough that we cause any damage, but we can really restrict the flow. So if we have vasoconstricted our arterioles with norepinephrine, we can then shut down the capillary beds by these kind of sphincters here. Or we can flood the area with lots of blood. If we have vasodilated our arterioles and they're wide open, lots of blood coming through, we can make sure that it goes into all the capillaries by opening up all the sphincters. So it just depends on what we want to do. Now, our veins are going to bring blood back to the heart. And they have the same layers, but not as thick as the arteries do. The veins, we have large veins, small veins, we have venules. Venules form on the downstream side of the capillaries. We go arteries to arterioles to capillaries, then we have little venules that form veins. And our pressure is very, very low in the veins. The pressure is somewhere around 10 millimeters of mercury, so it's extraordinarily low. And most of our large veins form storage facilities for us, storage reservoirs, they call them, blood reservoirs, or capacitance vessels. A lot of our blood that's not in circulation is contained in the large veins of our lower body, particularly our legs. It's there, and we can draw on it if we need it, but generally we keep it sort of in reserve like that. So it's just so there's sort of, while we don't have enough to keep every vessel filled, we keep a lot of it sort of in reserve. So now, blood movement through the veins. Remember, the veins are very, very low in pressure. There's no pressure, there's no push on it, because we get practically down to zero when we get into the capillaries. So we have to have special mechanisms to get blood back to the heart. And the most well-known one is called the skeletal muscle pump. Then we have the respiratory pump, and we have valves in our veins. Skeletal muscle pump actually squeezes our veins to push blood back to the heart. When our skeletal muscles move, when we do things, the veins that are running right beside the arteries get squeezed by this process, and it pushes the blood back up, pushes it back towards the heart, and we keep moving it up and moving it up. The same happens when we breathe. When our chest cavity expands, it compresses the vena cava, and that helps to push blood up towards the heart. Now, the vessels above the heart have no problem. They've got gravity working with them to bring the blood back down. But the bulk of our blood vessels are below the level of the heart. So we use the respiratory pump or the skeletal muscle pump. And we have these rather unique little valves in our veins. This is what the skeletal muscle pump looks like. We squeeze, as our muscles contract, we squeeze the blood, we push it up. Now, how do we keep it from falling back down? We have blood in our legs and we're squeezing the muscles in our legs are squeezing our veins. How do we get the blood from dropping back down? Well, we have valves in here. These valves look a lot like semilunar valves. There's no strings attached here, but as we push the blood up and we stop squeezing and the blood drops back down, as soon as it drops back down, it causes these venous valves to shut. And so it stays there. And then we squeeze again and we push it up a little higher and it drops to the next level valve and it stays there. And we keep doing this as we work it up. Then we get into the abdominal cavity, we have even greater pressure from the respiratory pump. So, which does become a problem when you have a patient that is pregnant and she's complaining of shortness of breath. She's got a large baby, maybe she's a small frame woman, whatever. And so you got a lot of pressure here at the abdomen, pushing up against the diaphragm, hard to breathe. And now she's got blood pressure issues too, because she can't get her blood back up because the baby's in the way. So those things happen. So it may just be the level of discomfort. It may become, a little more serious too. So anyway, veins are found in our valve. Veins have valves to keep the blood from dropping back in. And here's a little animation that shows how it works. We squeeze and push, blood goes up, drops back down at the valve, stays there, and then the next squeeze pushes it up even higher. Problems occur when these valves fail, because they will fail given the right type of stress. Varicose veins. Varicose veins occur because gravity is not our friend. We don't like gravity. Gravity is constantly pulling this blood down, and we don't like that. And so, if you have a patient that is in an occupation where they're on their feet all day long, 12 hours at a time, or something like that, some long periods of standing, it's not unusual for them to develop varicose veins caused by these valves gradually failing. So instead of a valve holding the blood up, it can't keep the blood suspended in the vein, blood drops back down, and then that causes the one below it to go back down, and then the vein distends and it's visible through the skin. It's painful and disgusting looking, whatever, Let's see.
So does pain occur before you actually get the showing of the varicose?
Yeah, it's because it's going to hurt.
Yeah.
If you're in any kind of occupation where you're on your feet a lot, you're prone to that kind of occurrence. Now, not everybody's going to get it.
Yeah, my mom has them, and then my legs have started hurt recently, and I'm like, I could buy certain tables, something
Yeah.
like
Oh, yeah.
that.
Yeah.
So-
I understand
and
completely.
you're
Yeah.
on concrete, basically.
Yeah.
You're walking all the time.
Mhm.
So, yeah. Probably my future most probably.
And that happens, if you have, if you're in education
You're standing.
and you're standing all day long, you always run the risk of that. If you're in retail and you're on your feet all day long, you run the risk of that. Anything where you would be on your feet all day long, you run the risk of varicose veins, but it takes a long time.
Yeah.
It does take a long time. And there are ways around there, you have to, it helps, really good shoes helps a lot of it.
That's what
And, support socks
yeah.
with the pressure there this is like old people's talk.
Yeah,
you know.
no, but that's what they told me.
But that's-
to wear.
that's-
They told me to wear those
Yeah,
long socks, these compression socks.
but the compression socks, they help if you're going to be on your feet all day long. So, I mean, I've been known to break down on days when I know I'm going to have 3 classes in a row. On those days, I might wear compression socks. Better that than to have the veins. It's not a big deal. It's part of the price we pay for the different jobs we have. So varicose veins are caused by these valves failing. The same thing occurs with hemorrhoids. Hemorrhoids are veins around the rectum that, whether through straining to empty the valves, causes the veins to enlarge and the valves fail, or someone sits all day. They're in a job where they have to sit all day long. Consider a pilot who spends 8 hours in the cockpit, like flying from here to Australia or whatever, or 12 hours or, something like that. Or, long distance flights where they're in a plane for 6 hours, or truckers who drive for hours on end, So people that spend lots of time seated and putting pressure on the veins around the rectum. So again, that's what the valves look like. We can actually see them. This is an ultrasound. Ultrasounds are great for picking up valves and problems within the veins. Those little tiny flaps that you see there are the valve flaps. You just barely see them right in the middle here. This is in the jugular vein. So this is return flow here. And it's not such a big deal, in the veins that are where the blood flow is coming down as it is for going up to the heart. And, little historical precedent here. William Harvey, the man that discovered oxygen back in, I guess, the 1700s, also discovered these valves. He put a tourniquet around his own arm, and that caused, when you get a tourniquet and you're going to have blood taken, your veins pop up. So, and that's how they can find the right one to stick. And the veins popped up. And so what he did was he pressed the vein with his finger and pushed all of his blood up above the tourniquet. And he pushed all the blood out of the vein. And he thought it would fill back up again, but it didn't, because it was being stopped by a valve down below. So by just running his finger across here, he could restrict the flow into the new region. He discovered valves, and then once he got a hold of a couple of cadavers, did some dissection, he was able to find the valves in there. So the fact that blood doesn't flow back down once it moves up. There's varicose veins right there. You can see that's a bad case of it there. A lot of times varicose veins requires surgery because they can be very painful. Same with hemorrhoids, large veins that, again, you're getting, the valves are failing in here. Interesting picture coming up. This is a hemorrhoid. I used to show this before lunch in.
That's nice.
I know. I waited, come on, but this is, it's a large, a hemorrhoid is a large mass of swelling at the where it's like a varicose vein, bulging out, because the veins have failed and they're bulging out, and this becomes probably very painful.
Is it just like go back?
No.
Or like, what do you do?
No.
Or do you go to the doctor?
Most people have surgery.
Seriously?
There's a procedure called a hemorrhoidectomy. Seriously, and they're removed. Or you can treat it with different topical
So you
approaches.
have to get those free.
You can, yes. Don't women get them after? Yes, they do, because of the pressure of the baby. Question is, don't women get hemorrhoids after childbirth? Yes, the pressure of the baby, pressure straining to push the baby out, is going to cause these veins to distend and maybe the valves fail. People that also have issues with constipation because they're going to push hard to try and get their valves to empty, and they're going to strain for that too. The whole process of what we call straining at the stool is the term. And when we get into the heart physiology, we'll talk about one of the big problems you have to watch out for with your cardiac patients is that when you strain, you raise the pressure in the abdominal cavity to the point that you stimulate the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve controls your pacemaker, your SA node in your heart. And as the pressure goes up and you stimulate the vagus nerve, your heart slows down. And if you stimulate it enough, it can slow down and stop. So, or have you ever tried to pick up something really heavy and you got a little dizzy, and just sort of like disoriented,
So is that like what could have possibly happened? Like my mom, this has happened with like 3 of her friends. They got up in the morning, was on the toilet, 55, 60-year-old man, and fell over dead.
Yes, that's
from straining and their heart stopping.
Yes.
And it's like a heart attack. They've had a heart attack sitting on the toilet and they fall over dead.
Yes.
First thing in the morning.
Yes, that's exactly what happened.
3 of my mom's friends that's happened to. One guy, he let out a really big burp. Said he didn't feel well, let out a really big burp and just fell over.
Mm-hmm.
Huh. And I said that was a heart attack. And I was like, what?
Yes. So that can happen, because they strain and strain and strain. They raise the pressure in here. It stimulates the vagus nerve, which comes up and stimulates the pacemaker, the SA node in the heart, and slows it down, and their heart stops. So they have to have usually have some sort of underlying condition.
Issue.
Yeah. The average person, the average healthy individual, probably not going to have an issue with them. But this is one of the things why when you have your cardiac patients, you have to watch out for them when they say they have to go empty their valves, because usually the pain medications causes constipation, and that's how old people are about going to the bathroom
Every day.
They have to tell you, I didn't move my bowels yet, I can't go to the store. I can't tell you how many times I used to hear that from my ex-father-in-law. So I didn't do anything to it.
You sure?
I just.
So once you get hemorrhoids, though, are they like a recurring thing, or like once you remove them?
They can be if you don't correct the problem. You don't correct the situation.
Same with
Same with like varicose veins.
Yeah.
So, okay.
Basically just
Yeah.
like a switch.
Okay. Now we can get into the blood vessels. Now this is a picture of the torso model. You've got one torso in front of you, and people on Zoom will be able to see this one. But we're looking at the carotid artery and the jugular vein here. This is one of the few places where arteries and veins don't share the same name. Most places you have whatever the artery's name is, the vein is named that too. But jugular and carotid have, for whatever reason, 2 different names. So here we see coming down off of the jugular, we see a very large vein here. And that vein is called the brachiocephalic vein. It's a short little vein. The jugular vein drains into that. Remember, blue are veins and red are arteries. Not really.
In models.
In models they are, yeah. Because last week when we were dissecting out the heart, if you saw the cardiac vein and the anterior interventricular artery, they were both the same color. They were both sort of tan. One was bigger than the other. So anyway, brachiocephalic vein, left subclavian vein. Left subclavian vein runs underneath the clavicle. So I'll bring it up here on the, you can probably see it better here. Here on the torso model, we've got this is the this is the subclavian vein running right underneath the clavicle. That's why it's called subclavian. And then this is the brachiocephalic here. Brachiocephalic is a very short little vein. This is the jugular here. Blood comes down and combines with the subclavian to form the brachiocephalic, and that runs into the superior vena cava, because here's the subclavian, brachiocephalic, and jugular on the other side, tucked away over here. So let's get back to. There is the left jugular vein coming up on the left-hand side, and right next to it, adjacent to it, is the left common carotid artery. Left common carotid. Term common means that it's going to split somewhere. And the carotid artery, you can have a left common and a right common. It'll split right at in your neck where you can feel your carotid pulse. Sort of, if you come straight down from your earlobes, right below your mandible, you'll feel your carotid pulse. That's the carotid sinus. And the carotid sinus, the carotid artery there splits into an internal and an external. So we have a left common carotid and a right common carotid. Both of them are going to split into internal and external. And if you look at the torso, you can see that here is the carotid artery here and over here, and where our carotid sinus is located is somewhere right about here. Again, if I come down straight down from the ear here and just below the mandible, right in this region is where you're going to find the carotid sinus. You can feel it. Don't put a lot of pressure on it. We have some very sensitive pressure receptors there, so we don't like to
Take people sleeping.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. That's why we try. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Left common carotid. Here is the right brachiocephalic vein there. Yeah. One of the nice things about the body is that whatever you have in the right, you're going to have in the left. In most cases, there's going to be a few exceptions, but whatever you have in the right, you're going to have in the left. You have the right brachiocephalic. You'll have the right subclavian coming off of that, and the right jugular is coming in. Probably can't see it well, but the right jugular, there's the right subclavian, and this little part you see here is the right jugular vein, and this is the right common carotid here in red. So right there it is. Okay, now, and so the torso model is pretty good in some of this. Let me point some of these things out again to you. So I can zoom in a little bit. Okay, so we have, this is the subclavian here. This would be the left subclavian. This is the right subclavian. This is the left common carotid next to the left jugular. Here is the right common carotid right next to the right jugular. Here's the right subclavian. This little one here and here are the right and left brachiocephalic. So they're very, very, very short, almost the smallest veins in the body here and here. You got a subclavian artery that's even smaller. So, and then all of these feed into this is the superior vena cava right here. Superior vena cava draining into the right atria, only called the superior because it is on top. Because the inferior vena cava runs the whole length of the thoracic region and most of the abdominal region. And yet it's called the inferior.
So. Is this the- You can look so back up.
This,
Okay.
in the back of the liver,
Yeah,
is that it also?
that's, yeah, the blue one is the inferior vena cava. Yeah. And the red one right next to it should be the abdominal aorta. Should be a, see, that's, let's see, because they run side by side. I'm missing my liver over
Yeah.
here. Okay. Now, if we look at the slide that's up now, blood vessels of, this is going to focus mostly on the thoracic cavity here. We can see pulmonary trunk. We've all seen that in the heart, pulmonary trunk. We have the pulmonary semilunar valve right there at the pulmonary trunk leading to the lungs. And we have the right and left pulmonary arteries coming off the pulmonary trunk. The pulmonary trunk is an artery, even though it's sort of purplish here. It is an artery, but it's carrying blood that's reduced in oxygen, and it yields the two right and left pulmonary arteries. The pressure in the pulmonary trunk is going to be low, somewhere between 20 and 25 millimeters of mercury. We don't need to pump it up too high. Do you want to come up here?
Yeah.
And look up here?
Yeah, come over.
Yeah, or, yeah. 'Cause I don't think they've bitten anybody yet.
No, not
so-
yet, maybe my kids.
Well,
Okay,
that-
I did
that-
not my kids back.
That doesn't count. That
No,
doesn't
that
count.
does
That
not
doesn't count. Yeah. So anyway, so the pulmonary trunk, the pressure is low. We don't want it to be too high. The lungs are very, very thin. We don't want to send 100 millimeters of mercury pressure to the lungs that blow them right out. So, okay. There is the aortic arch, the curve on the heart. You can see it pretty well on this model here. And we didn't get to see a good view of the aortic arch last week. Let me show you.
It's completely gone.
Yeah, we had a. Here we go. Here is the aortic arch right here coming up out of the heart. It comes up out of the left ventricle and then dives over like that. So this is the aortic arch right here coming up and over. Now what we're seeing, then let me get back to this. So there's the aortic arch. And when we looked at the heart, one of the things that is always interesting is that the big vessel you see first is always the pulmonary trunk. It's always in the front. The aorta is more in the back in here. It's easy to get confused in that. So, because I've been incorporating those pictures we took last Wednesday and Thursday into the PowerPoint for the next time around. I'll show it to you all when I get done. But having to trying to remember my perspective after taking it a week ago is sort of challenging too.
I have a
So,
question for you.
yeah.
On like, okay, let's just, on the aorta. On lab, would it be like 2, 1, are them all different portions of it that we would have to differentiate between?
Well, all you need to do on the aorta is know that identify the aorta and the aortic arch.
Okay.
Now
So
that-
the numbers aren't like other areas that need identifying?
No, no. Now, the only thing you will need to remember is that those are 3 distinct arteries coming off the top of it. There's
Okay,
those
that's
3
good.
arteries on top are distinctive. So they have specific names. And this is where we have one of the little hiccups in the organization of our blood vessels. So okay, there is the brachiocephalic artery. It runs right next to the brachiocephalic vein. And you would think coming off the heart, it's going to be one of the carotid artery, correct? You know, and you would say, you'd almost be right saying that. But here's our heart model. I can find there we go. We're looking at the heart from the front. This very first vessel is the brachiocephalic artery. it lasts for about an inch. And then it splits. You know, the left common carotid is the one in the middle. And then over here, the one on the far side is the left subclavian artery. But this, the brachiocephalic artery gets no respect.
Like it branches like right here.
Yeah.
Your arms.
The brachiocephalic artery goes up and then it immediately splits into the right subclavian and the right common carotid. It lasts for 1 inch. That's all it gets, you know. So see where it says brachiocephalic artery. Directly above that, up, get out of the way. Up here is the right common carotid. Over here is the right subclavian. So it doesn't get a whole lot of, but there it is. You know, the bane of anatomy students for years, trying to remember that little artery. So, okay, now, there is the left common carotid. You saw it on the torso. There is the right common carotid, left subclavian, right subclavian, left vertebral arteries. And the vertebral arteries are, you know, they're pretty neat because they're often used to do bypass now. Instead of taking a vein out of your leg, which is still done, you can take the one of the vertebral arteries and cut it off where it's branching off to go to the vertebrae, cut one of them off and bring that down and tie it directly in below the blockage. And now you don't have to worry about cutting a vein and tying it off at 2 places and then cutting the artery in 2 places and stitching the vein. And all you gotta do is tie off one artery and stitch it in next to another artery.
My mother-in-law said the most painful part of her surgery was where they removed the veins.
Oh yeah, yeah, I can imagine it would
When
be.
you had your chest crack open and
Oh, yeah.
your leg hurt.
They use bolt cutters to cut open the heart.
Fun fact, chainsaw was invented in 1780 by 2 doctors who wanted a faster way to remove the pelvic bone during childbirth.
That makes perfect sense. You know, most orthopedic surgeons are really good carpenters and woodworkers because of all the tools they use. You know, that's usually their hobby. So, okay. So brachiocephalic artery, the left vertebral artery, there's a right vertebral artery over here. There it is. Right axillary artery, the one that's in your armpit, and that leads to the one that we use when we take blood pressure, the brachial artery, which is right there. Now, the good news is that nearly every one of these arteries are going to have a corresponding vein. There's a brachiocephalic vein, a subclavian vein, an axillary vein, and a brachial vein. So, and there's our radial artery and our ulnar artery. Now, if you want an easy way to remember this, look at your thumb. Your thumb lines up with your radius. So your radius is right here. Your radius means that the radial artery runs underneath the radius. The radial vein runs next to the radial artery. So the radial artery goes down towards your hand, the radial vein comes back. Underneath the radius is your ulna. You have an ulnar artery going down and an ulnar vein going back. So just by knowing where your thumb is, now you know where four your vessels are. And it's the same on both sides. And I've got a few more things to throw out on that too. But I was trying to teach the AP1s where the ulna and the radius were located. You know, I said, if you can find your thumb, you know where your radius is.
So your radial artery
Is right underneath your radius and your ulnar artery and your nerves. And we don't really pay much attention to the nerves, but like your ulnar nerve runs right along your ulna. So
is it the radial artery that blood is drawn from?
no, it's usually the brachial artery because usually you get it done like right up in here or in this area. And the brachial artery comes down along here because that's the one that we usually block to take blood pressure with. We put the cuff around you.
Okay. Oh no, like draw blood.
Oh, I know, to draw, yeah, oh, I know,
Okay.
that's usually still the brachial artery at that point. So, you see, the brachial artery comes all the way down, thank you, to here. And so it's usually that one is easier to get to. So, okay. Diaphragm and abdominal aorta right there. And that goes all the way up. This curve comes all the way down here like that. Now, I'll open that in a minute. Now, the hand is very easy to track. You have the radial artery runs up right behind to the thumb, and the ulnar artery is lined up with the little finger. And there's the radial artery. And right above that is the radial vein. There's the ulnar artery and the ulnar vein right there. Now you'll notice they form two arches in here. Those are called the palmar arches. And this is the venous arch, the palmar venous arch, and the arterial arch right there. And even easier to remember is that the arteries and veins in the fingers are called the digital arteries and the digital veins. So it's very easy to, I mean, all you have to remember is palmar, like the palm of your hand, for arteries and veins. It makes a big arch in there, and then the digital arteries and veins are coming off of that. So and this is a very, just by knowing where the thumb is, plus right behind the thumb is where you get your radial pulse. You take your pulse right there, at the radial artery. So, okay, now let's take a look at the vessels in the arm. The axillary artery in the armpit. This is. You can see the axillary artery right here in the arm. And, and it starts at the top of the arm and runs down to about mid part, and then you run into the brachial artery. And again, the brachial artery is the one we always use for taking blood pressure. So the subclavian artery branches to the axillary, which branches to the brachial. And then you have your radial and your ulnar underneath, like that. And it's the same on both sides. So it works out very, the artery and the vein, axillary, brachial, radial, ulnar, and then down to your the arches. So you get down here, radial artery lined up behind your thumb, ulnar artery lined up by your little finger. You got the palmar arch, the arterial palmar arch, and the digital arteries, and you got the digital veins and the venous palmar arch. So there they are, digital arteries. So back to the torso. Now this one, lets us see just how big or how large that brachiocephalic artery really is. The brachiocephalic artery is this section right there. That's the brachiocephalic artery. Now they have it partly shaded so you can see it. So again, it's only about an inch long. You don't get a whole lot of artery out of it. But the way the heart is designed is to have three distributing arteries coming off of the aortic arch. And the only way it works is to have the right common carotid and the right subclavian come off of the brachial. It works very well that way. So that's one of the few ringers that we have. Right here is one of the exceptions, that everything's just exactly the same. It would be much easier for us if this were the right common carotid coming off there, and we didn't have the brachiocephalic name sticking in there. I don't know why it's not done that way.
I think it has to be difficult though.
Oh yeah. I mean, how hard would it be to call that the right common carotid with the right subclavian coming off of it? That would be, instead we got, yeah, and we got to stick that brachiocephalic in there instead, so. Okay, so that's, here we see the aortic arch, the brachiocephalic artery, left common carotid, right common carotid, left subclavian, right subclavian. Remember, they run directly underneath the clavicles. Oh, got carried away with myself there. And you have the right common, and we have the purple ones are going to be the right jugular and the left jugular. So, okay, now let's get a close-up of the heart. Left atria, left ventricle, mitral valve right there, and you can see the chordae tendineae attached to the papillary muscles. And I'll tell you, the pictures we got last week, we got some nice pictures of the papillary muscle with the chordae tendineae attached to it. So it really does look just like this.
Stressed out and all that. Good ones.
Yeah, our cows died happy. So
Sure.
well, whatever. So, but that's exactly what the papillary muscle looks like. This is actually a pretty good model here. The chordae tendineae, papillary muscles. The interventricular septum is the thick wall, and our hearts definitely match that. And if you looked at the surface, you could see the sulcus, the groove where the veins and arteries ran down across the middle of the heart above the septum. There's the right atrium. There's the right ventricle. Here's the tricuspid valve and the pulmonary semilunar. Had some very nice pictures of the semilunar valves too. And pulmonary semilunar, pulmonary trunk is this structure here. This is the left pulmonary artery, the right pulmonary artery, because remember your perspective when you're looking at this. There's the right pulmonary artery, the ascending aorta, the aortic arch, brachiocephalic, left common carotid, and left subclavian right there. Superior vena cava, and this little tiny thing down here is the inferior vena cava. Even though it's much long, it runs through the whole of the abdomen. And the pulmonary veins, I was able to actually find one, maybe two pulmonary veins. I found one pulmonary vein dumping into the left atria. And I may have found, last time I was looking at it, I may have found another pulmonary vein. So, but I'm not certain yet before I label it. But I was pretty impressed with the things that we did find on our hearts.
It makes this make like more sense.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Seeing it in real.
When you can stick your finger into in through the semilunar and pop up on the outside and see exactly where the aorta is going or the pulmonary trunk is going, it makes a lot more sense.
It does.
So let's see. Okay, superior vena cava, left brachiocephalic vein, right brachiocephalic vein, left subclavian vein, right subclavian vein. You know, there's no left and right brachiocephalic artery. we only get one. That little thing there. So left internal jugular, right internal jugular, axillary vein. We have a subclavian vein going to an axillary vein, going to a brachial vein right there, running right beside the brachial artery. We have a couple of, the outside here is called the cephalic vein, and we have the basilic vein, median cubital vein, diaphragm. Oh, the diaphragm, they spelled it wrong. I just noticed that for the first time ever, the diaphragm is spelled wrong. Yeah. It's not the first mistake we found in these things. So the interior vena cava, inferior vena cava. Now this is the gastric vein. The gastric vein goes over towards the stomach. And there's a gastric artery that also goes over there. We have what we call the splenic vein going to the spleen and a splenic artery. Most of the arteries and veins stick to the same naming sequence of our name for the organ. So there's the splenic vein, and you'll have the splenic artery. This is the superior mesenteric vein that drains the small intestine. And you have if you have a superior, you got to have an inferior, and that drains the large intestine. And this one right there is a unique structure that we have. It's called the hepatic portal vein. The hepatic portal vein, as blood comes back on the superior mesenteric from the small intestine, we've absorbed all the nutrients. That's what it does. This is where the nutrients go into the blood supply. Before it can go into the vena cava to go to the heart, it takes a detour. The hepatic portal vein takes it right into the liver to clean it up. And then from the liver, it goes out the hepatic vein to the vena cava. So we're bringing nutrients up along the superior mesenteric. Instead of dumping right in here, we go over here, the liver detoxifies everything. And then after it's cleaned everything up, it then sends it back out to the vena cava to go onto the heart, and sends it out through the hepatic veins. So it's a unique arrangement, because remember, everything we eat, everything we drink ends up in our blood supply. So we have to make sure it's clean or knocked down to where the levels of chemicals or additives or whatever aren't going to hurt us. So it's why, I made the point in AP1 about a dose of Tylenol. That the liver has a lot of smooth endoplasmic reticulum, a detoxifier. When we take 1,000 milligrams of Tylenol, we don't get the whole 1,000 milligrams. We get whatever comes out of the liver. The liver knocks it down, and whatever's left over is what our body gets to use. That's why we have different doses for different age groups. You would give a child 200 milligrams of Tylenol, not 1,000. You might give an 85-year-old 500 milligrams because their liver isn't as efficient anymore. But the dosages are based on body size, body weight, and their liver being able to process it. And so, because everything we eat and drink has to go through the liver to clean it up. Yeah.
I remember reading on Tylenol. I had to take some when I was in the middle of I think it was something where your hospital was out of Berto.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't even, the one I had, it didn't even say on the age. It had it group by what your weight was.
Yeah. Because everybody's going to be different at their ages. I mean, at their weight at different ages. But if you body weight is a real good indicator. You would never give 1,000 milligrams to a 5-year-old, unless you didn't like him or something. Yeah.
Or if it's like a real big 5-year-old.
Yeah, or a real big 5-year-old. But never did the Benadryl, but there are many times I wanted to. Never mind. So,
Bitch will knock them out real quick.
oh yeah, or me, you
Not
know,
mine.
one of the.
No, it will. I mean,
It does reverse on my
Yes,
son.
our one son, you give him Benadryl and like bing, bing, bing,
see,
bing, you
that's
know.
how, yeah, my daughter is third take. I mean, they're like, give it not.
My son has to take, my son takes Clonidine, the same strength that my 66-year-old mother-in-law takes for when her blood pressure gets too high so that he can go to sleep at night. And he don't stay asleep. 12:30 at night, I'm hearing Nerf guns going off. 3 a.m. He doesn't care at all about nothing.
Okay, moving on, renal vein. And the renal vein is going to be matched by a renal artery. Yeah, so this is blood supply leaving the kidneys there, the renal vein. Now, if we come back and look at the arteries, we'll see the hepatic artery, the gastric, the celiac trunk going to the stomach, bringing blood there. There's the gastric artery there, the splenic artery going to the spleen, the superior mesenteric artery taking blood to the small intestine. Here is the inferior mesenteric artery taking blood supply to the colon, renal artery. These are the gonadal arteries supplying either the ovaries or the testes, and splenic vein again. Okay, and here's a close-up showing the renal artery and renal vein on our kidneys. You know, there's the abdominal aorta. Right next to it is the vena cava. Huge vessels side by side. You can't tell anything off of these. Oh, we have these little, just the ends of the arteries here cut off. Like, what are they? I've never been able to look at these and say, oh, I know what that is. You know, so I never ask questions about the, you know, you better have I better have a whole artery there so I can see what it is. So don't worry about the cut off pieces. So
like when you have kidney issues, is it because of blood issues or damage with the actual organ?
oh, it could be both. You know, high blood pressure will affect the flow through the kidneys and your ability to filter. Long-term high blood pressure will damage the kidneys. So you know, the old wives' tale about drinking too many Cokes are hard on your kidneys. You ever hear that one? Yeah.
They give you kidney stones?
Yeah. Well, no, not really. You know, but kidney stones come from eating a lot of calcium and potassium salts. So now, granted, I will say that diet drinks have a lot more salt in them than regular drinks do. So the other thing is, it's an urban legend that here in the South, we get more kidney stones because we drink sweet tea. That, you know, up until a couple of years ago, everybody believed that. And then finally somebody pointed, you know, it was a study that supposedly came out of some university in it may have been Hopkins in Baltimore, but it was interpreted wrong. Sweet tea doesn't cause kidney stones. It causes other problems, but not kidney stones, you know. You know, because what's tea do? It makes you pee all the time. How do you have time to leave the calcium behind or the sugar behind? You know, sugar doesn't cause kidney stones. It's calcium and phosphorus that cause kidney stones. You know, there's lots of things there are lots of kidney problems that we can get into with a lot of it deals with high blood pressure and salt retention and things like that. So in fact, we're going to spend, we'll be talking a lot about the kidneys and fluids in April when we get there. And it's, you know, it is, as much as I love talking about the heart and stuff, I really like talking about fluids and electrolytes. So, and I will tell you that I've had lots of students in the past come and tell me that they were so glad that I spent time talking about fluid and electrolytes. Sounds like a boring topic, but I will tell you this as a teaser: there's no faster way to kill your patient than to get their fluid and electrolyte levels messed up. Because once you get them out of balance, it's hard to get them back. So, you know, if you don't like your patient, you know, and I never said that.
Electrolytes.
Yeah, I never said that. So, okay, mesenteric artery. Okay. I'll have to erase that from the recording too. So, now,
Mrs. Brooke told me.
No, I never said that. Never said that. Abdominal aorta, inferior vena cava, renal artery, renal vein, right there. Now, here's something else we see going on. At this point, at the bottom of the artery of the abdominal aorta and the beginning of the inferior vena cava, because remember the vena cava is going up, the aorta is coming down. There's a big split there where the veins come together and the artery separates. This is where the artery and the vein are going to become common, because common means they're going to divide into an internal and an external. In the case of the vein, it comes together because of the common. So let me show you what I'm talking about. There's the right common iliac artery. There's the right common iliac vein. What that means is that the right common iliac artery is shortly going to divide into the internal and external right iliac artery. Because whenever you have common, it means you're going to have an internal and an external. That seems to be the correct term there to indicate that, like the left and right common carotid, it's going to have an internal carotid and an external carotid. Here we have a right common iliac artery, which will divide into a internal and external right iliac. The right common iliac vein is formed from the internal and external right iliac vein. You'll see that here in a second. Now on the model here, you can get a better view of this. There are the right and left common iliac veins. See how they come together to form they're coming together to form the inferior vena cava, because remember, veins go up. So you have the right and left common iliacs. There's the inferior vena cava. Now below that junction, you have the right and left external iliac veins. Right here. And that means if this is external, that means this is internal. Because whenever you have common, you're going to have an external and internal. In this case, we have the external and internal iliac veins come together to give you the common iliacs. And there's the right and left internal iliac veins. There and there. They came together up here at this point. They come together, and at this point here and here, this junction, that gives you the common iliacs. Now the artery is going to do the same thing for us. We're going to have the same type of breakout of the wording. Let me clear this. Okay. Now, so we have the internal and external iliac veins. And let's take a look at the arteries. Here is the right and left common iliac arteries. Now we're going down. These abdominal aorta has split into the common iliacs, and they're going to subdivide into the internal and externals. They're going to run right beside the veins. Inferior vena cava. There are the right and left external iliacs and the right and left internal iliacs. So they're running. I just found another mistake. They got those labeled wrong. So they called the internal iliac veins the externals. I'll have to fix that the next time I go through this. So anyway.
So you're swapping these.
Yeah, but what you're seeing though is that anytime you have an external and an internal artery or an external or internal vein, they're going to be coming off of a common structure. So in this case, it is the in the arteries, it's coming off of a common vein, common artery. In the case of the vein going uphill or upstream, it's forming a common vein. But every time you see the term common, you're going to end up having an internal and an external. So it just how, like common carotid, left common carotid gives you an internal and an external. So, okay, now close up of some more arteries in the leg. The abdominal aorta divides again into the common iliacs. Now we see in our leg, we have what's known as the deep femoral artery. Not to be confused with the femoral artery. The femoral artery is a large artery that runs down along the inside surface of your leg, right in here on each side. It sort of parallels the great saphenous vein that we frequently take out for bypass surgery. There's the deep femoral arteries here and here. We have a circumflex artery that runs all the way around the neck of the femur, and you have a circumflex vein right beside it, artery and vein on both sides. Now there is the true femoral artery on the right side and the left side. Very large. It's a good place to take, again, to take the pulse. Femoral vein tends to run right along with it. And the saphenous vein is just to the medial side of the femoral vein. Okay, there's the deep femoral vein running right next to the deep femoral artery. And there's the great saphenous vein. This is the one that we can do without. We can take this vein out and use it for bypass surgery. Lots of people do that. It's still done. It's still done properly. So, okay, here's our leg. Here we can see the femoral artery and the femoral vein right there. Oops. Both very large. We're looking. This is the front. This is because we're looking at these are the quads right here. So now if we look at the knee, we can see the great saphenous vein on the medial side of the leg, the deep femoral artery and the deep femoral veins running beside it. Here is the femoral artery right next to the great saphenous vein as it goes by the knee. We have arteries around the tibia. We have the anterior tibial artery, which is in the front. It runs right along the anterior crest of the tibia. And if we have an anterior, we got to have a posterior. That's just the way this naming works. Here's our lower leg. There's the tibialis anterior. There's the shin, the shin bone, the crest of the anterior crest of the tibia, the one we use when we walk around the house late at night in the dark and we find things with it. Sharp, pointy things like table edges and stuff like that, and chairs that somebody moved around during the night. So, but there's the tibialis anterior right there, and the anterior crest is right next to it. And the anterior tibial artery runs down along here towards the foot. And on the back side, we have the posterior tibial artery. Now there's the popliteal artery, and there's a popliteal vein, which is right there. And this is a good location for deep vein thrombosis, the DVTs, because you bend your leg. And when you bend your leg for long periods of time, you get a clot that forms right below usually right below the knee. That's the classic. The popliteal vein is usually the classic location for a deep vein thrombosis. People that are prone to clotting, people that take long trips and don't move, they sit in their car and don't change position. They fly to Australia and they don't get out of their seat because they're afraid the plane's going to drop off from underneath them.
Who just want to go to Australia?
I just use that as the best example.
Yeah.
I used to until they went nuts over COVID. So,
So now you're like,
Yeah.
yeah, I can see a kangaroo at the zoo, you know, so. Anyway. The posterior tibial vein below the popliteal. And of course, this is the posterior tibial artery. So we probably have an anterior tibial vein, which we didn't see in the other side. So, and then in our foot, there's our anterior tibial artery there again. And oh, there's the anterior tibial vein because we had a posterior tibial vein. So it is there. So, and the fibular vein, oh, the fibula gets a vein all its own. How about that? So, dorsal pedis and, okay, and out of this. And that are the blood vessels. That is blood vessels. That are the blood vessels. So anyway. It's not the same type of pressure learning the bones or learning the muscles were, because you got the heart to remember and the major arteries, and we've still got a few other things on assessments. We come back, we'll talk about blood pressure and pulse taking and things like that. So anyway, let me get out of this. Any questions on anything that we've talked about? Okay, well, when we come back from break, we're not having a lab test right away because we still have to do the assessment section. Lecture. We're almost done with pregnancy. I'll finish pregnancy on Monday when we come back from break, and then we can decide then when we want to have a test. So I know I heard that. So, okay. I'll decide with considerations. So, okay, anybody have any questions on anything? Okay, then I'm going to get us out of here. And y'all have a nice, well, I'll see some of you tomorrow. No, I won't see anybody tomorrow. So not from this class. Y'all have a good